If you're listening to this tape, we're so glad because it means that at least someone is still around. It's night time now here in Northland, and such a relief, even though the temperatures now for a lot of the year don't really drop below about 30 at night. Temperatures through the day range anywhere from 40 to 50. There's hardly even really a discernible winter anymore. It's just hot. Some time ago we took to digging under the house to dig tunnels down and create some spaces in the ground where we can at least get some relief. Electricity is now spasmodic. Sometimes it's on, most of the time it's not. We were so lucky to find an old-timer who had a tape deck and some spare batteries that we were able to use to record this. You don't know what you've got till it's gone, and we really didn't know what climate change really meant. Everyone was so busy living their daily lives and just trying to get by. I remember back in 2020 thinking that it was so hot and the drought came and everyone just thought, it's something that's just changing. Won't be like this all the time. We'll just get through it and some rain will come and we'll have winter. But it's not what happened. What happened was that it just kept getting worse. First it just got hot more and more and rained less and less, and we started getting affected more and more by the disaster in Australia after their bushfires and floods, and then the dust storms, and then the pandemic, and then the crazy, powerful weather which just pummeled most of the country on and off from about 2021 onwards, and it just kept on escalating. And as their climate grew more intensely hot and just insane weather events, we also started to get that. I remember when there were the bushfires in Australia, and we first started having hazy skies around Northland, and it's when we realised that we're so connected, we're all connected. What happens in one place in the world affects everybody else. Now there's, we're trying. We find it very difficult to get water now to drink. We have to spend most of the time at home, and we only kind of go out once a week to queue up in the intense heat to receive government rations of water and food, which is just chaotic. Every time it gets worse and worse, more chaotic, as more and more people have to be reliant on the rations, and the rations delivery often is late, increasingly now it doesn't turn up at all, or there's so many roadblocks, and it's incredibly dangerous for them to even attempt to bring supplies in. But we have hope. We really do. We really have hope. Now that everything is as bad as what they said it would get, even though it's happening quicker, just that we have hope now that it really is happening exactly as what they said, that people out there surely must be now really doing something, and so we're just waiting and hoping and very hopeful. It's not always easy, but at least we've got a space that we can be in that's cooler most of the time, but it's dark, but at least it's cool. It's not times that are scary. We have to close all the doors and the double doors, and then finally the doors to our internal safe space at night. You can hear maybe in the background some of the street sounds. We don't kind of know what's going on out there, and we don't really need to know. We just know that when the sun goes down, it's time to go underground and use what limited power might be available, or to use some of the solar lights just to light up the space. And we've got some games, and if we have some power we might put on a movie that we've saved. The internet isn't really working much anymore for a lot of different reasons. At first it was kind of a bit intermittent, slow. It started to not be able to get to more and more websites. Only the kind of main government sanctioned news sites were pretty much the only kind of news that we were getting. Some people have got ways of communicating, but most of the websites and like Facebook and Twitter and the various chat or messenger applications have been kind of, they're either broken or shut down, or at least outside of New Zealand we don't kind of really know much about what's really going on. We hear a lot of reports that the different countries are getting together on a regular basis, and they're very hopeful that this is only kind of temporary, and sometimes scientists have kind of said on the news that maybe this is just an abnormal kind of weather pattern over the last 30 years or so, and that it just seems like we're either very close to to the weather returning back to normal, or that, you know, there's going to be some solutions. They talk about solutions being deployed. I remember when I kind of first heard about the tipping point. Some say it was like in the year 2000. Some say it was around 2008 or maybe 2010. And I don't know, it just, you know, like, why didn't we do anything then? Like, why didn't we protest more? Why didn't we demand not only our government, but demand that all the other world's governments like did something? Like, why didn't we stop Australia doing what they were doing? You know, knowing that anything they do directly impacts us. But we've got our P2 masks. We had them before kind of the troubles kind of really started. Remember that day we kind of got the alert that there was some smoke coming across the Tasman and that people should stay indoors or get masks, and we fortunately already had some P2 masks, but we wanted to get some more, and we couldn't even. We went everywhere and everywhere. There were cars queued up. By the time we found, you know, the last place that we could try that kind of didn't appear to have any queues, we went inside the store and it was just practically empty. Just all sorts of crazy things were gone. There was just literally hardly anything else left on the shelves. Like just insane things that people had stocked up on, and I think that's when we kind of really realised that things really had changed. But things had been changing for a long time. Oh, it's another night. We're at Pete's place tonight. It will seem a bit quieter on the streets. It's not. Fortunately, it's quieter through the day. I think maybe the problem is that because it is at least a little bit cooler at night, that's when people sort of, you know, there's just gangs roaming the streets. You know, there's such a huge black market for just about everything. And we kind of have tried to make the house kind of as impregnable as possible. We sometimes hear knocks on the door, but most of the time it's relatively left alone. I think maybe because we're kind of up on the hill and we're sort of further up and we've got neighbours kind of further down the hill, and they seem to kind of play a bit more of an active role in with maintaining the barricades that kind of make it a little bit more difficult for all the different groups to kind of come up the hill, and most of them are, I suppose, also so kind of hungry and tired and thirsty that they're not going to kind of try too hard to make the effort to come all the way up the hill in Parihaka, and there's lots of other areas that are much easier for them to kind of access. We don't even really know much of what goes on out there at night. Occasionally you hear a little bit of gunfire. We think some of that is mostly just the army just trying to keep things quiet so that everyone can just kind of get a normal good night's sleep. The police, we don't know much about the police. I did hear that from a friend who knows someone that used to be in the police, that a lot of them were just allowed to go back to their homes and their families and look after them. There wasn't really a lot of need for the police over the last couple of years, because there wasn't really a lot that they could do, and it was becoming increasingly kind of even unsafe for them. So everyone was kind of, I suppose, quite pleased when the army, came through and helped with the ration deliveries, and we know that they're kind of keeping things safe at night, so it's probably all for the best, I suppose. But I do, it's hard sometimes to even kind of remember what it was like all those years ago, when everything kind of still seemed okay. It was just, just those, it's just that summer in kind of 2019 and 2020 where it didn't rain. It didn't rain for a long time, and there were water restrictions, and they started to declare an emergency. And I remember thinking at the time, this is so weird, what's happening is what so many climate scientists and so many activists were saying was going to happen, that it would get hotter and drier, but then also at the same time would get weird weather when it rained it would just deluge and would get flooded. And then that winter when we had the snowstorm, it was just weird, just really, really weird. I remember when they then in 2021 had to start to close some of the beaches. It was just due to just some contamination that had been kind of happening. But I remember one of the beaches that we could still go to, it stank. It really, really stank. Just because of all the dead fish everywhere, and the water was so hot. It was just not refreshing at all, even though it was a, really, kind of beautiful, hot summer. We were all looking forward so much to, we looked forward so much to going to the beach that day and just being refreshed by the ocean water, because the rivers were dry, and the rivers that weren't dry were poisoned and too hot themselves, and we had to save our petrol rations for about 2 weeks in order to make the drive up to Whale Bay, and even then it was kind of, it was feeling weird. There was different communities that were, it was like groups of people in various areas that kind of just like, I wouldn't say they forced us to stop, but they just kind of slowed the cars down and kind of asked us a lot of questions about where we were from and where we were going, and we said we were going to the beach because we just hadn't been to the beach for so long and it was so hot, and they just kind of shook their heads and kind of looked quite surprised and just said nothing, and then just eventually kind of let us through. They would have cars that were blocking the one-way, the bridges where you've got to give way. They're just the single-lane bridges, so it was, I suppose, quite easy for them to kind of have these kind of like little points where, I suppose, we weren't there to cause any problems or trouble or anything. No, we just wanted to go to the beach, and we'd saved up our petrol rations, and we'd even managed to get a few, kind of like nice things to kind of eat when we were on the beach. I don't know. It's just, so it's like really disappointing when we got to the beach, and it was gone. The beach was no more what we had imagined it would be, and the smell, the stench of the dead fish, and the water was a funny colour when it was no longer kind of crystal clear like it used to be. It seemed kind of lifeless, and I hate it when we get the knocks on the door. It's just kind of like, you just don't know who it is. Maybe they're in trouble, or maybe it's one of the neighbours. Just so glad that we're kind of like down here and we just kind of ignore it. Just hope that they just don't want to bust the door down. Sometimes I think they do it just to kind of like just annoy us, and it's just crazy. I remember, like when Australia had their bushfires, and the government there just acted like nothing was kind of wrong. didn't do anything. And like by 2020, like I remember, doing a lot of reading back then about, I read so many different articles about what was going on and what was happening, and I think I kind of first realised that something was really, really wrong probably around like about 2016 and 2017, maybe it was 2017. I'd been kind of like not interested in, the protesters against, all sorts of things. People protesting against coal and people protesting against, carbon emissions, and saying that, the consumeristic lifestyle we were leading was just not sustainable, that, the planet's only got limited resources. Even though it seems like a really big planet, it's only got limited resources, but then the resources we did have, we to produce those things, it uses energy, and that energy was creating a nightmare in the atmosphere for us. And yet, like everyone still had their mortgages to pay, and everyone still liked to do all the things that they would do, and driving around in our cars everywhere, and like even when they changed the petrol price to be about $10 a litre, like that got people kind of thinking about it, but instead people just got angry that petrol was so expensive, and then there were just, there was lots of protests and lots of unrest, and then, people with electric cars, like they started just getting carjacked all the time, and those cars would just, be taken away, but not that it kind of really mattered, because eventually, like the electricity started to kind of get rationed, and we it didn't really matter if you had a petrol car or a petrol car. And so, there was a time when it was pretty cool, like so many people were using the buses in Whangarei, and so many people were cycling around and walking, but, even that kind of, in a way, I suppose, was a little bit short-lived, because that summer of kind of 2022, 2023 was just, it was harsh, and like it was just not really possible anymore to really through the day be cycling or walking in like 45-degree temperatures. And then the buses kind of got overcrowded, and even then, the buses then, even though they were just being used so well, like then because we had to reduce all of our carbon emissions like really, really radically, really quickly, just everything started to get, either not available or rationed quite severely. Even when the petrol was like $20 a litre, people were still buying it, and then they were fighting in the queues when it got rationed, and it was. So then more and more people just were not able to kind of really get out and about during the day, so more and more people started staying at home, and lots of businesses initially, they also had to kind of like start to go kind of part-time, and so many businesses kind of went under. And I remember when we first started seeing lots of the empty shops and factories and all the for lease sales and all the for sale signs on shops and businesses and houses. It didn't really, I suppose it seemed like it kind of happened in slow motion, but in the end it all kind of really happened really, really rapidly. Just one thing led to another thing that led to another thing, and it was such an amazing thing when the government stepped in, because the supermarkets were they started to get really weird. Like at first, just every now and then you would go there and it would just be closed. There used to be a sign saying, not enough staff today, apologies, we will be open tomorrow. Or then they would, like, no deliveries today, come back on Friday, and it was just Wednesday. And then when they were open, there were guards, security guards, security guards. I kind of thought, oh geez, I should have become a security guard back then, because they were everywhere. The police were so busy. It was before the army kind of came up to help things out. But everyone was great. There was a really beautiful community spirit. Everyone kind of understood. But just for some people it was just a bit too much, and it was frustrating for them. I think because it was still so fresh in people's minds, the life that they used to lead, that the changes were just really challenging for a lot of people. And it was just became all kind of really super hard. Just one thing led to another thing to another thing. Oh, we're back here again tonight, underground. I suppose we've probably been doing this now for about 9 months. I think the last time I recorded on this tape was maybe maybe a month ago, maybe 3 months. Not more than 3 months, but not less than a month. During the day it's just getting hotter and hotter. I remember when they said that climate change would be exponential, and not always about the heat, because the winters now are brutal at times, and 1 week we've got snow falling, and then the next week it's like 30 degrees, and now that it's summer again, like almost the average temperature is about 50 degrees. I recall reading about how they said that it's kind of like, the way it becomes exponential is that, just one thing leads to another, and as all different things break down, so like, because of the heat, and the drought, the trees started to die, and then when we had less green trees, we got even less rain, and then the trees that we did have that provided some relief from the heat, it just got hotter once we lost most of the trees. I remember when people would just cut down trees all the time, like, trees that had been there for like, 20, 30, 40, 50, 80 years, and they'd just cut them down because they'd want to put a road in, or they'd want to put in some new housing development, or, they put houses all over Auckland, like the most fertile growing land in probably the world, maybe, and they built houses and they concreted over the top of it. And then the food production kind of got pushed out and out into areas of land that were not as productive for growing. And with the trees going, then, even, like, probably from about, I don't know, I can't remember, maybe about 2022 onwards, we started hearing reports about how, because of the heat and the strange weather, that crops were either just, not getting sufficient water, or they were getting destroyed by the thunderstorms that would create like these mini tornadoes that would rip through the fields, and so like fresh food almost kind of slowed to a trickle. We were, having to rely more and more on canned foods and imported foods, and then like the supermarkets started to, stock all sorts of dried foods, and they just seemed like that, like the food was coming out of some sort of like old stockpile, and use-by dates had been kind of erased and rubbed off. Supermarkets started putting up signs saying that, due to, delivery problems and supplier restrictions and so forth, that, there would be, no refunds or any kind of recourse. It was just like we had to be happy with the food that we did actually, manage to get. And I remember when one of the supermarkets in town, almost kind of overnight, they kind of like halved their space. I think it was because increasingly most of the aisles kind of, had less and less stock. It was just kind of almost ridiculous to have such a huge supermarket with hardly any fresh food, hardly any, kind of range of things in the other aisles, and and it started to become quite problematic going to the supermarket. Like, it was, incredibly then expensive to drive there and wait in the queues, and it just got difficult, like, But, I suppose in a way, like, we learnt to adapt. We we sometimes did do our missions through the day. That despite the heat, we kind of worked out that less and less people were able to go out into the heat and endure the walk or the cycle. The buses were too full, so we kind of made our missions in the heat of the day, but it was it was dangerous. It was so hot. We'd be so exhausted afterwards, and then of course we would go through more of our water rations than so in a way it was like a catch-22. If you go at a time when it was dark, it was started to become increasingly more dangerous, and even though it was not as hot and you wouldn't go through as much water, by the time you got to the supermarket at the end of the day, stuff might be gone. I suppose that's why some of the supermarkets kind of started. I remember the first time going as early as possible in the morning, that supermarket would open and we would kind of go there, and then one day, like, they had a sign saying that their new opening hours were from like 12 till 4, which just seemed crazy. Like, who's going to go to the supermarket between 12 and 4 when it's so hot? But it was actually it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense to do it between 12 and 4, because kind of like the most hardiest or people, or the people that were really, really well off, that were able to afford the huge petrol price, or they still were able to keep their electric cars running somehow and not have them kind of taken. That's why I suppose in a way between 12 and 4 kind of like became the new normal of that was the safest time to be out, because it was so hot, and not even the groups of people causing trouble kind of really got out during the day. I just wish that we had have acted earlier. I just don't understand why, when all the warning signs were there that we were heading towards a climate calamity, I just don't understand why we didn't do more then. Why do you have water restrictions when there's not much water left? Like, surely we should have just been conserving as much as we could as early as possible. Even if the dam was like 60% full, like, we should have just like really reduced water supplies then. Like, why did we wait? I don't understand why we waited. And when the government had to do really drastic changes to basically force everyone to reduce their carbon emissions, the problem was that it was already too late. Whenever it was that they really started to get quite hard on energy use and fuel use and power, and the problems with the internet, and just everything becoming in short supply, for good reasons. Like, everyone got behind it for a long time. Like, there was that really great community spirit that, finally we're doing this together. We're going to make a difference. But I suppose, like, it's it's easy in retrospect to say that we should have done more and we should have done it sooner. Should have done it sooner, I suppose. Should have done it sooner. Things are really starting to get quite difficult out there at night. It's just getting harder and harder every day. Less to drink, less to eat. It's just it's just crazy, like, like just how things change and escalate just exponentially. What used to be just quiet kind of noises in the background of just, the army looking after us, like, we haven't even seen them now for such a long time. I don't know what's going on anymore. We started to really conserve our rations a lot when for like, I think after like the third time that we only got rations every 2 weeks, that was when I kind of realized that perhaps things might be changing for the worst, and we started to kind of do a lot more than what we had been doing, because we'd been like so hopeful that things were going to turn around so quickly. But I just thought, like, maybe this is a sign now that perhaps things aren't going to get better anymore, and so we started to grow our own food, but we grow them in trays, and we have them in a modified part of the house where they get some sunlight, but then we have to bring them down underground at night just to make sure that if anyone breaks through the layers of the security we've got, that we don't lose all of the kind of the plants and shit. It seems to be getting closer and closer. It's just unbelievable that, like, despite all of the shortages that we have, they're just, for whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be any shortages of bullets. I don't know. Just, we had 3 families here, but there was kind of a bit of a disagreement, as some of the rations went missing. We don't know exactly when, but some rations and stocks went missing from our place, and we had a bit of a disagreement with the other families about what happened, and I was really sure that, we hadn't misplaced anything. We've got everything numbered and labelled, and we've got set days for set things, but, just things started to go missing, and, like, we had to then start to lock things up, and yeah, we just had a bit of a disagreement around, like, who may have been taking them, and then it happened to one of the other families that we would spend the night underground with, and we kind of realised that maybe it was one of the other families that we were spending the night with, and so we kind of came together and suggested to them that maybe for a while they should just stay in their own place. But they got really, really upset, and they kind of like pleaded with us and cried, asking us, like, not to do this, and like, a lot of them were not well, and they were finding it more difficult to go out and do the queuing, and we couldn't queue for them. Like, you had to show your license, and they scanned it to make sure that people wouldn't queue more than once, and just maybe they were taking stuff, I don't know, but like there wasn't enough for our own families. It just became really difficult to share. Like, everyone was sharing at the beginning, like everyone was amazing, but as it started to get harder and harder and more dangerous and hotter, and like, I kind of get it. Like, I could only do the deliveries, in daylight hours, because it was just getting too dangerous, and it was not, like, after, lots of people started, having things taken off them after they had been queuing for hours, and they were walking home, and were stopped, and either had all or most of what they had taken. Like, people started to become scared to go out at night. But there was a bit of a sickness for a while. I don't quite remember how long it happened, but yeah, a lot of people got sick, and the queues got shorter for a while. We kind of guessed that it was just because a lot of people were sick, but people got sick, and then they weren't able to go out and get their rations, and nobody could get it for them, and I suppose maybe they just got sicker and sicker and weren't able to come out anymore in the heat and join the queues, and it's hard. And I suppose we started to